started. So thank you everyone for joining us on this very, very windy and cold day. We appreciate you coming out. So today we're having our community conversation series talking about general technologies that the Barrie Police are exploring, as well as really aiming to have an education piece on what's happening in the landscape of policing when it comes to technology. So that's really the goal. I will introduce myself very quick. My name is Madison. I work as our organizational researcher here at the Barrie Police. Also have a huge nerdy interest in technology and the way that police are using it. So I have a dual role up here as moderator, learner, and somebody who also works for the police and helps implement some of these technologies, as well as measures their effectiveness. So I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves because I think it's best hearing from you, and I would love to hear you, the organization you represent, and why your voice matters on this panel.
Why am I here?
Why
am I here? Okay. Well, thank you for that introduction, Madison. Good evening, everyone here in the room, and hello to everyone watching online. My name is Ryan Fritsch. I'm a lawyer with the Law Commission of Ontario. The Law Commission of Ontario is a think tank at the Osgoode Hall Law School, and our job is to do law reform projects. We're totally independent. We're funded by an organization called the Law Foundation of Ontario, which provides funding for organizations like ours to do work that's dedicated to improving access to justice, and that's in the public interest. So one of our projects over the last couple of years has actually been a project looking at the impact of artificial intelligence in Canada's criminal justice system. And somewhat uniquely, we're not looking at just like one specific technology or one specific institution in criminal justice, but we're actually doing sort of a life cycle analysis. We're recognizing that the use of artificial intelligence technology anywhere in the criminal justice system is going to impact everyone else in the criminal justice system. So if police use AI technology to identify a suspect, that suspect is going to appear in front of a judge for a bail hearing, right? The AI evidence might have an impact on that person's liberty, whether they get bail or not. That evidence will then follow that person if their case goes to trial. And it'll be adjudicated by a judge. What does a judge need to know about these AI technologies and how they work in order to make good decisions, right? And then beyond trials, there's institutions in the province that are dedicated to overseeing different functions in criminal justice. So we're asking whether or not those institutions are also ready for the forthcoming challenges that AI presents, but also to help us harness some of the potential benefits of AI. So I'm really happy to sort of bring this neutral, independent academic perspective to tonight's conversation, and very much interested in hearing from all of you and the folks online too. So that's me. Fun fact, should we do fun facts? What? There you go, we set them up. Fun fact about me, I don't get to Barrie very often. I live in Toronto. But I do remember when Barrie had the Robert Simpson Brewery. Is it still here? Well, it's Flying Monkey now, but I remember when it was Robert Simpson, and they used to make a beautiful lager that I swear was one of the best lagers I've ever had. So my request to you is, if any of you have an old Robert Simpson lager in your basement, let me know, and I'll pick it up on my way out of town, okay? Cool, thank you.
So I'll go next. My name is Rich Johnson. I am the Chief of the Barrie Police Service. Why I'm here is, and I know Madison's heard this many times, but in charge of a public safety that exudes police legitimacy and to police by consent. And what we know from about that is for police to have that legitimacy within a community, they have to be lawful, effective, procedurally, and distributively just. And that is a challenge in today's world. And I think whether it's technology, whether it's any number of things that can influence that, the idea being is the expectation of a community, of a public safety official, to do so in a manner that engages the community, but also builds trust. We understand that sometimes what we have to do is not the most popular, but it's trying to find a balance within the community where we're able to safeguard the community, but also respect the charter and the privacy of the So I'm here to actively engage, hopefully with the people online as well as in the room, to demonstrate that as a public safety organization, we are hoping to engage with our community, to answer questions, to alleviate fears, to share some of the ideas that we're looking at doing, but to do so in a manner that perhaps we haven't done in the past, an oversight perhaps, or just not tradition, but the idea being, if we want to look at new technologies, how do we do that in a manner that respects the community, that they participate in, how it gets rolled out and what it looks like in terms of policy building and procedure building. So this is a conversation. This is not, I think any one of us wants to just a one-way direction of chat here. And I'm looking forward to answering some questions and having some constructive but critical debate and critical discussion around it. At the end of the day, I think everyone wants a safe community. I think everyone does, but you're trying to find balance in that.
All right, hi everybody. My name is Shakir Rahim, and I am Director of the Criminal Justice Program for the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. I'm a lawyer as well. Some of you may have heard of the CCLA before. We are an independent, nonpartisan organization, and we've existed for many decades and are concerned with and active about protecting the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So in my work, I oversee a lot of the cases that we try to intervene on before the Supreme Court that help shape the direction of the law in Canada. We're often involved in scrutinizing what different police services are doing and making our views known about what courses of action would be most compliant with the Charter and uphold everybody's civil liberties. And we're often talking in public about criminal justice issues that we think people in Canada should be concerned about. So I'm very pleased to be here today. I think these kinds of conversations where we bring together different points of view on evolving areas of law and policing are very important. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. And in true chief style, you stole my language on critical yet constructive. So our goal here is really, to be transparent and talk about some of the concerns that are a big ask, but
Sure.
I would love for that. I can.
Do you want me to stand there? We'll just stand up. Yeah. It's all good. Totally.
I'll relinquish my podium.
Wow, I got the podium. All right, let's see. Is this running? Oh, great. Okay, cool. So AI in criminal justice is a really big topic. It can apply to a lot of different things. So I just wanted to start us off by kind of introducing some of the current uses of artificial intelligence in Canada, so that you have a sense of what's already happening with this stuff. And then I'll also compare what's happening in Canada to the United States, because they kind of grabbed the baton and they're really running with it. So we're able to look at what's happening down there, learn a little bit about that, and take some of those lessons and bring them to bear here. This slide deck can be made available to you if anyone wants to check it out later. But I'll just skip right ahead to what's going on with AI in criminal justice. So there's a couple of known uses. It's early days for AI. Most of us only really heard about AI maybe a couple of years ago when ChatGPT came out, and you realize that ChatGPT can write poems for your beloved and can do your homework if you're a kid. So you're probably like, hey, this AI stuff's pretty good. But the same technology that's in ChatGPT can be applied to a whole bunch of other things, including things like image recognition, object recognition, making predictions about people, all that kind of stuff. So there's lots of different ways that AI is being adapted to uses in the criminal justice system. Three of them I want to highlight that are examples of AI in criminal justice already being used in Canada. And some of these have shown some really promising results. So one use of AI is called automated license plate recognition. And this is where police can attach a camera to a police car, and as it drives around, the AI is scanning all the license plates going by and can identify the plate sort of in real time as the police officer is driving down the street. What's unique about this, as distinct from like an officer who might be driving down the street and using his eyes to recognize license plates, is that the scanning happens very, very quickly, and it's totally automated. So in 2024, the Toronto Police rolled out this automated license plate recognition system, and they report that they're able to now collect 1.2 million plate reads every single day. That's a lot. That's a lot. But they're also using this technology for enforcement. So they also report that as a result of using this technology, they've got an 82% increase in ticketing suspended drivers. So folks who shouldn't be driving are being pulled off the road. And they also say that they've identified 30 missing persons using this automated license plate technology. Another example is using AI for facial matching and for deep fake detection. So York and Peel Police report faster matching of suspect images to mugshots. So this is where they've identified a suspect, and then they want to know, is this suspect known to us? Does this person have a prior record? They can then take that image and compare it to a mugshot database. That process used to be manual. It used to take a really long time, photo by photo, literally flipping through books and stuff like that. Now the AI can compare your person's face to like an entire database of thousands of mugshots in like seconds. So that goes much faster, much more investigative efficiency for police. Another example of image recognition is deepfake detection. So when RCMP officers investigate suspected cases of child sexual exploitation, they often get laptops that are full of, honestly, child porn images, sometimes thousands, sometimes even hundreds of thousands of images. Very difficult to go through those, very traumatizing for the officer to have to go through those things. And because AI can now create images, you don't know if the person that you're looking at in that image is real or fake, right? So the RCMP have actually developed various kinds of deepfake detection technology to try and identify real victims from imaginary images. And they're like reporting results where they're able to actually identify victims and then act on that to try and help kids at risk. Another example is the scale of investigations. Investigations are becoming very complicated these days. For example, if you're investigating fraud or some kind of organized crime, you might have evidence that accounts like hundreds of thousands of emails or hundreds of thousands of texts. And if you wanted an officer to go through all those manually, it could take like a team of 12 like weeks and weeks and weeks to get through it. Now using artificial intelligence, they can scan through all that stuff very, very quickly and get leads for further investigation. So one presentation I heard showed a situation in which there were like literally 500,000 emails, and they were able to like cut through all those in just a couple of hours using artificial intelligence. So these are some of the ways that AI is already being used in Canada that we know about, and some of the results that have happened. There's a whole bunch of other examples that you can check out. Each one of these is linked, so if you want to do a deep dive into these things, you can check it out. But we also know that AI is being used for things like the de-encryption of digital devices. So to open up phones, they've tried to use AI for that. Jails and prisons have used AI to try and classify inmates for potential risk of violence and have like put people in isolation as a result of that stuff. There's also use of these tools in courts. So some legal research and writing is now being done using AI. Unfortunately, this is like making up cases, which is not as helpful. So there's lots of, the link there actually is a link to 69 reported decisions in Canada where AI has made like false cases up and like people have got the book thrown at them by judges. And it can also do things like generating court transcripts and doing automated translation, stuff like that. So things that can help the administration of justice. So that's some of the uses in Canada. What's happening in the US? Well, as I said, they've kind of like run with the baton a little bit and are using AI in even more creative ways. For example, they're using AI for conducting risk assessments to determine who should get bail and under what conditions. AI is being used for sentencing, like what kind of a sentence you should get and under what conditions, and might be used to decide like who is a candidate for diversion. That's when instead of prosecuting you, they give you a chance to like clean yourself up and get stabilized and avoid prosecution. Some of the problems here that we're finding is that the AI tends to be biased. It's trained on historical data that reflects over-policing and overcharging of certain populations. And as a result, the predictions say, well, that's what a criminal looks like. So when someone like that appears before the system, it says, well, this guy you should really throw the book at because he falls into that category, right? US police are also using AI for what's called open source intelligence. This is where they can use AI to like scan what people are talking about on Facebook, to scan what they're talking about on Twitter, and to identify potential leads, potential suspects, potential crimes. You know, people will kind of stupidly post, hey, look who I shot last night. Kind of cool, eh? Okay, so they can use AI to do that. But some critics say, you know, there's a chilling effect of that, that if people know that police and other law enforcement agencies are like scanning our social media texts, maybe I'm not going to post that. Maybe something might be politically controversial and could result in a knock on the door. This is actually happening down in Florida now, where they're sending out officers to knock on people who are like critical of the governor and stuff like that. Not good. They're also using AI down in the States for the mass tracking of movements and for things like autonomous drones. So this is where they can send a drone up and it's got facial recognition on the drone. And then as it flies to the scene of a crime, it's actually picking up everyone who's standing in their backyard barbecuing and making a record of their faces. Stuff like that's happening. One other example I'll give you too is that they're also linking through AI like police databases with like healthcare databases. And so what this means is that in states that have severely restricted women's right to access abortions and other kinds of healthcare, that if they go out of state, they can actually link their out-of-state visit to the police surveillance network and then prosecute that person when they come back into the state, even though what they did outside the state is completely legal and fine. So stuff like that's happening. So these are some of the foreseeable and unforeseeable impacts of artificial intelligence that, you know, before it rolls out, you might want to think about. That link right at the very bottom there is a US Justice and AI Tracker 2. It's trying to compile all the uses of AI amongst police in the US, and there's some really wild stuff in there. Like they got like AI-powered like robot dogs now that are like running around and stuff. Sounds like Terminator, but okay, this is the world we live in. So big picture, are we ready for AI in criminal justice? I just want to paint a little bit of a picture about how this stuff is regulated right now. First and foremost, it's really important to note that police are very highly regulated professionals. They have a duty to ensure that they have lawful authority and are acting lawfully when they're using different investigative technologies. That duty always exists, whether we're talking about an old technology like, what's an old technology? CCTVs, right? Or something that's brand new like CCTVs with AI, so it can recognize your face. Police also must comply with lots of different laws, including the Charter of Rights, the Human Rights Code, not to discriminate against people or be biased, privacy laws, and so forth. And there's lots of oversight bodies like police boards, the Law Enforcement Complaints Agency of Ontario, the Inspector General for Policing, the Privacy Commissioner, and so forth, who oversees policing. So the challenge that we have for us is, you know, are these existing laws and are these existing systems up to the task of governing AI? Part of the challenge is that as yet there are no specific laws specific to governing the use of AI by police. So it's kind of an open question. There's no things like prohibitions on the highest risk uses of AI, like things like mass real-time facial recognition, like constantly scanning the population. There's no mandatory precautionary principle, which is a principle that says don't deploy or use something until you've proven that it's safe and that it's reliable and that the results that it gives you are valid. There's no standard way to assess risk, so that's one topic we'll talk about tonight. And I'd also point out that there's increasing concern over digital sovereignty. And digital sovereignty says Canadian data and the processing of Canadian data should happen in Canada and not be transmitted across borders to other countries who might then do with that what they wish. So these are some of the gaps. Consequently, police are effectively self-governing right now when it comes to AI. We're starting to see some self-governance policies coming out from the RCMP. The Toronto Police has a use of AI policy. York and Peel have a facial recognition policy. And the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police is now developing not just a policy on AI, but a tool to help police assess some of the risks that we can foresee AI having. But it's early days, and it's a real patchwork. And that's why conversations like this are like so critical, because this is kind of a once-in-a-generation chance to say, hey, this is a big technology and it's coming, and we need to get this right to make sure we get the benefits of AI without suffering some of the risks and consequences we don't want. So that's where we're at right now, Madison.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right on.
So we'll make sure all of this information, the slides, all of that is available, barriepolice.ca/technology. I'll have that up on the slide afterwards. So thank you kind of for the landscape. So now that we talked about what technologies are out there, I have 2 questions for the chief. What technologies that fit under that scope are Barrie Police using? What are we considering? And also, do we have policies in place that regulate these uses?
Okay, so I love the multiple questions all at the same time.
I'll
So I will
remind you.
break this down and please correct
I'll
me
remind
as I-
you.
Okay, so necessarily we have redaction technology that we use. All of our officers on the front line are equipped with body-worn cameras. And as you can imagine, every single time they go out to a call, when they're interacting with the public, policies and procedures are in place and the camera gets activated. That creates, there's digital evidence. And so should that be necessary to go forward into the criminal court, it is required to be redacted insofar that some things are not to be seen in the camera. Children, license plate, like there's certain aspects of evidence that are not to be shared with the defense, but again, within legal constraints. So that needs to be redacted, and for an individual to sit there and watch for every hour of, or for every minute of video, I think it's at least 3 minutes. 3 minutes of redaction. So you can imagine every single officer. We do not have, 150 people sitting in a room redacting all those minutes, all those hours, weeks, months of video. So that's one aspect that we necessarily are using, and it still has a human sitting at it, at the redaction, ensuring as best as possible that it is capturing everything it's supposed to. There is error. There is always error in systems, folks. But we're trying to manage with limited, finite resources, but at the same time to get the job done. Because we're not going to stop policing in the community to address that. We also have automated license plate readers, as you've heard. Again, interestingly enough, the province of Ontario actually had a grant that went out there with CCTVs and automated license plate readers, and we did get those. There are policies and procedures in place in terms of auditing, access, internal and external controls. We have, and part of that would be object recognition we have as well, part of that ALPR system. So now that's limited in terms of where we're at right now. So I'm clear. Part of the reason we're looking at having these conversations is we cannot stand still in public safety. And I can give you all the scenarios which are wonderful and positive to, from public safety, and then the ones that there's, the cautionary notes. Technology can be used effectively and lawfully, but can also be misused. And I absolutely agree that there needs to be guardrails and controls. What do I foresee us using? I see us finding great value in such things as autonomous drones, not equipped with facial recognition, so I won't, but I don't want to live in 1984 either. But at the same time, you can get an automated drone to a location, and I'll cherry pick, of a missing elderly or vulnerable or person or a child in under a minute, where it would take our finite resources, our cars, and we would do it. We will, and we'll continue to send cars. But how fast can you get there is, there's an equation there with how likely you're able to find that individual and how fast. And we live in Canada, folks, and I point you out the window and look at the weather. So there's constraints, right? So we are trying to be effective and efficient, but within reason. I think And there are some controls in place why we're exploring that, and we think there's great value there. And I can imagine there's a great deal of contention around the concept of facial recognition, and I understand that. But I think there's also potential for great usage. We've had instances in this community, and I don't want to go back too far in history, and it wasn't that long ago, but we've had individuals go missing by misadventure, and they're heartbreaking to the families and to the community. But if we're able to effectively find them faster using facial recognition, what do you want your public safety service to do? To turn, like, we can't keep our head in the sand for this. I think there's responsible usages out there, and I think there's an expectation of our community that we're going to explore that. I do see value in that. I would also argue that, in certain circumstances, very limited. And I understand completely, it becomes a slippery slope very quickly for a community where its technology can be misused. That's not the intention here. But when we have an active, violent incident ongoing, I think there's an expectation of public safety services to address it as effectively as possible. And if we're able to access, facial rec to identify an individual in a limited area in a given time and place, I think there's an expectation, if we can, to do so in a responsible manner. And I mean, it's the nightmare scenarios, and I can come up with them all day long, because that's our role, is to prepare for the worst day. But we are constrained, and we recognize that. So I would see us using that in a responsible fashion, as long as those guardrails are in place. Mm-hmm. I mean, social network analysis from all the records, the massive amounts of data we have, while we lawfully obtained it and all that, because that is necessary. Let me be clear. The information that we have, that we lawfully obtain and are allowed to keep or to hold on to, there's value in looking at, we are just people. And I'm not trying to remove the person from the system, but I think there's an ability of systems to exponentially add value to to what a person can do, and finding connections where we didn't see it, and to do so in a responsible fashion. And it would still always be validated by a human being at the other end. What I'm not trying to do is take the human out of the system. Automated, an autonomous drone, yes, it's autonomous, except there is a pilot, and I use the air quotes, the remotely piloted aircraft system, the autonomous one, would have a pilot watching where it's going, monitoring where it's going directly to the location, and then viewing that picture in live time as much as possible, for the sole purpose of addressing what we're there for. There's a suspicious person outside my house, they're trying to break in. We can get a car there and we're racing as fast as we can, as safely as we can, in 5 minutes, 6 minutes, and that's maybe too slow. We want to be there, we want to reassure the community. So there's a whole bunch of technologies, and I mean, I just don't want to limit it to the idea being, if we want to explore technology with our community, we want to be upfront, transparent, but also ask, what are your fears if we do have this, and how can we best demonstrate that we're going to put in place guardrails? I know it's only self-governance right now, and that may not be the best situation, I understand it, but the police meet the world where it's at, not where we'd like it to be at. That's not we are a piece of a justice system, and we have to understand our limitations. We do not make the law, we are not the law. We are those individuals that are tasked with taking the law and applying it in the population, but we have to do so under a number of constraints which are necessary and required, and we respect.
Mm-hmm. So we talk about checks and balances, policies. How or can the community access Barrie Police's policies around technology and uses?
So and to be quite honest, folks, this is why we're doing this. I sat in on a Canadian Association of Police Governance webinar, and they were looking at best case scenarios or best practices, and they would suggest that if you're going to start using AI and technology, post them online. Who are you hiding from? At the end, I'm like, do we want to use this to make the community safer? Yes. Can it be misused? Absolutely. Everything can be misused. But make it clear as day. Let everyone take a look at it, see it. And I also think, and I mean, again, up to the community, how would you like to see it monitored or usage? I mean, it seems reasonable to me that if we believe it's so valuable, what's the issue with then posting online every time we're using it and attaching it to an occurrence number or an account of some, so there's a measure of usage. What I don't want to do is be like, if it's behind a veil, it then becomes cause for concern.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Any comments from the panelists on that? Anybody want to jump in?
Sure. Well, I think that one of the topics that I wanted to mention, and I think it relates to this discussion, is why there might be hesitance or complexities in trusting the police to use this kind of technology responsibly and ethically. And the first thing is that there's always some natural tension between the role of law enforcement in achieving some kind of public safety objective or making sure that they can conduct an investigation quickly, and some of the guardrails that we have in our society to ensure things like privacy rights are upheld, for example. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? There's all kinds of checks and balances that we have in our country, and that is positive to have that kind of relationship together. But that can lead to some of the mistrust or concern because of you sometimes have those kinds of competing or objectives that are in tension with each other. The other piece is that even if the intent is in good faith, and I think we heard a lot about some good faith intentions, and those are important, I think, for all of us in the community, sometimes the outcome can still be problematic. And we've seen that before in the criminal justice system when new non-AI technologies or expert opinions are relied on. So for example, there was a major inquiry in Ontario called the Gouge Inquiry that looked at the use of forensic pathology, pediatric forensic pathology. And what had happened was there was an expert who testified in court and said, here are my findings about how this child died, that helped ground convictions of, for example, close family members to those children. Later on, it was found that there was a lot of problems in the kind of science that was being used, and it led to a number of wrongful convictions where people who did not commit the crime they were accused of went to jail. We've also seen that with something called the Mother Risk Laboratory here in Ontario, and that was a laboratory that did testing on hair samples where mothers might have been accused of child negligence for substance use. And again, this kind of information was used to ground convictions of some mothers as having substance use issues and having different child welfare consequences result. But now that lab is widely discredited. The science that it was using was flimsy. And so the reason I think that's important is sometimes, there can be a case where we say, well, this is the slam dunk, or this technology or this approach, helps us know that this person did it or this investigation will be effective. But only in hindsight do we actually see the problems that might be associated with it. And I think AI in particular represents something that is really new in scope and process. Many of us don't necessarily understand the complexity of some of these algorithms that might be used in some kind of analysis, or how AI gets to a particular decision. And so that's why I think these conversations are happening, and why there are legitimate concerns being raised from the public about how this technology is used.
You bring up a point about talking about the
Science of the technology or these approaches. So I would love to hear from the panel. It is new and it's novel. So how do we know these technologies are working? How do we know they're effective and not causing more harm than doing good? So what are things that police need to do, or who else needs to be involved in the evaluation of these?
Let me jump into that one because I think it's important. I think Shakira makes excellent points. And I use facial recognition and a desire from a public safety organization to use it. But let me be clear, the initial research on it was incredibly lacking. So what did it do? It face matched, or there's facial recognition, and we think that's wonderful. Except, what does that actually mean? And to be quite honest, the initial examples of it, and even still today, the machine learning that took place, it was disproportionately trained. It has to, machines learn. That's the idea behind it. Was trained on this kind of face. It was white males, and so it was really poor at identifying members of minorities, and especially minority groups, women in minority groups. So again, the technology, you have to question, you have to be a critical thinker when you're looking at it. You have to ask those technology companies, like, how was the machine taught, or what was the learning? How long did it take? What was the sample size? Was it demographically, representative? And I mean, you'd want to see that, but I think that would be an expectation of, again, as a police organization, we want to be evidence-based, we want to be evidence-informed, and we want to see the research that's quite robust under it. And I don't know if there is that much right now in AI across the board for everything, but I think the cautionary note is, so I don't, and we have to err on the side of caution, yes, but we can't let perfection be the enemy of the good. It may not identify 100% every single time. Like, it's 99%. Sure, for a Caucasian male, but not for everyone else. But if I'm looking for a missing person and it helps do it faster, look, I'll take the 60% shot, folks. Because there's a family out there and they just want to see their little kid come home. That's like, please understand why we want to do this. But at the same time, even with the best of intentions, there needs to be incredible guardrails when this is not, I do not think that the research is incredibly robust on this. I just saw one today from Essex in the UK about the increased identifiability under facial recognition and its accuracy going up across the board, which was interesting. It actually, they erred on the side of caution with the false positives were incredibly small. The false negatives were far higher, but that's an acceptance rate where you're missing the people you're looking for, because it's better to be wrong, missing the person, than it is to be wrong getting the wrong person, if that makes sense. Sorry, that's about it. That's a little bit muddy.
Thank you, Chief.
Sorry.
I want to talk about some of the different levels of risk. We talk a lot about risk, and Ryan, I know you did this amazing job with kind of setting the stage. Can you talk about the difference in risk and kind of how that's interpreted and what we mean by that when it comes to AI tools?
Yeah, so first I just want to go back to something the Chief said a couple of minutes ago, which was like the willingness to post like all the uses of AI and like the outcomes of that and like how it was used and every time it was deployed. It was a great idea. Because one of the challenges we have right now is that there's how many police forces in Ontario?
43, and then there's another 10 self-governing Indigenous.
That's just in Ontario, and then you multiply that across Canada. There's a lot of different police forces using AI in a lot of different ways. And right now, no one's tracking how all this is happening. So we don't know what like the footprint of AI looks like in Canada right now. So transparency initiatives like that would be absolutely terrific. Not just on its own face, but because then we can like monitor this stuff and actually see the performance of this stuff in real world use cases. And that's what's troubling about some of the assessments that we get of AI right now, is that the vendor of the AI is also the person who's assessing the performance of the AI. And oftentimes that performance assessment is conducted in lovely laboratory conditions. It's not conducted on dark nights with bad weather and grainy cameras where the error rates like shoot through the roof, right? The other thing you have to remember with AI is that what's unique about it is like the scale at which it operates, right? So just imagine like a police looking through binders of photos to match mugshots to suspects. Well, now AI can like look through 100,000 photos in seconds, right? That applies to a lot of these other AI technologies. So I gave you the example of Toronto's use of automated license plate recognition. It's now picking up 1.2 million license plates a day. A 1% error rate on 1.2 million samples is 12,000 errors every day. Even if it's 0.1%, errors, that's still 1,200 misidentified people. So we have to be honest about what the footprint of this stuff actually looks like in real life. And that's where, to Madison's question, there's this like burgeoning area of artificial intelligence assessment that you conduct prior to deploying this stuff. And I hear the chief's point. We don't want perfection to be enemy of progress, but AI assessment isn't intended to be perfect. It's intended to do a scan of all the foreseeable problems that we know AI can trigger. So AI can trigger violations of people's rights to a fair trial, right? If AI is biased, then the evidence is going to be biased, right? And then that person's going to have to like push back against that. So how do we control for that? How do we identify for that? If we know that AI might be used to scan social media, it might have chilling effects on people's willingness to post. That has an impact on our democracy and the rule of law. Under what conditions should we be scanning social media posts? Does that mean we should be doing it en masse all the time? Or does it mean we should only trigger that when we have reasonable grounds to suspect that someone might be up to something? You know, that kind of thing. So when you extrapolate from this, there's actually a very mature system now for sort of testing AI and testing it for compliance with Canadian rights under the Charter of Rights, Human Rights Code, privacy law, etc. For doing technical compliance, i.e., is this technology actually valid? Does it actually produce what it says it does? Like, does it actually do correct and accurate facial recognition? And is it reliable? Like, to what extent does it get it right, and to what extent does it get it wrong? So there's sort of a technical assessment. And then, of course, there's the other important piece, which is community engagement and all this stuff, which is before you deploy these things, check for the rights, check for the technical performance, but also what's the community think about it, right? And making sure that the community has an understanding of how this stuff works and can then sort of give you the okay to try it out is really, really important, because ultimately they're the people subject to the use of these technologies, and they're the folks at risk of things going sideways. So that's where this kind of idea of assessing AI before it goes out happens. And generally what they do is they kind of like say like there could be low risk and high risk. Low risk is like AI spell checkers. If it gets it wrong, who cares? No one's going to jail, right? But if you misidentify someone because you're constantly scanning faces everywhere, that's a problem, because that person gets arrested. Bail might say, sorry, we're not going to release you based on that facial recognition evidence, and now you're in jail for weeks or months, right, pending hearing. So that's problematic. There's one more layer, though, and that's prohibitions. So certain countries across the world have said some uses of AI are just too risky to use. The European Union passed comprehensive legislation last year that said things like trying to predict who might commit a crime in advance is just too risky. It's just too much of a guessing game, too prejudicial. So like ban it, just prohibit it. That's not a legitimate use of AI. Mass real-time facial recognition, constantly scanning everybody. 1.2 million plates, 2.5 million faces a day potentially. Too risky, right? Because now you've just created this dragnet that can catch everybody. So in addition to low risks, high risks, there's also a category of prohibited risks. And part of what I'm doing in our project at the Law Commission of Canada is sketching all this stuff out. And we're going to have a whole bunch of recommendations about this stuff in about a month that'll come out that I think will help inform this kind of conversation about how we assess the risks of AI so that we can gain the benefits of it without having to worry about like mass rights violations.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. To hear from the CCLA perspective, right, for these texts, we talk a lot about checks and balances. So what should we be asking police services to put in place for these checks and balances to ensure mitigation
The bias and mitigation of maybe those privacy impacts.
Yeah, I think I'll highlight a few themes that I think are important, both for police services and also how we're approaching the regulation of AI technology at large. So one that I think is important is for police services to be proactive versus reactive. So sometimes we've only found out that a police service is using an AI tool out of luck. So somebody was a journalist and looked into the issue, or there was some report. There's a lot of cases where police services have not necessarily come to the public or used their different oversight bodies that might exist to ensure that people know that this kind of technology is being rolled out. So I think that's quite important, is that both police services and their civilian oversight boards, for example, here in Ontario, create a framework head-on and base that framework on some of the research and best practices that different expert organizations in our province bring, like the Ontario Human Rights Commission, the Information and Privacy Commissioner, police bodies like the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, and the Law Commission as well, which is clearly has done quite a bit of work in this. Another thing, and this is a little bit more on the geeky legalese side, but is terribly important, is the need to actually have our legislators, our members of parliament, step up to create legislation when it's necessary around AI use by police. A lot of the standards that police officers are obliged to use have been created as a result of court decisions regarding compliance with the charter. So for example, when the police can search you if you're walking down the street and they have some degree of suspicion, when they can conduct a more invasive search, like a strip search, and how that has to be conducted. A lot of that guidance has come because there have been major cases challenging certain practices before a court. But there's not necessarily guidance from Parliament in the form of a law about those things. And what that sometimes does is it creates a vacuum where sometimes things are going on, but there's no framework to actually govern how it's occurring, or the minimum to comply with the charter just becomes the accepted practice, even though there might be other important considerations that lawmakers could bring into consideration if they were actually creating legislation. So this is something like, even if you're reaching out to your member of parliament and asking them, what are you doing about this, or what are the plans for this, where that kind of citizen or resident engagement becomes really important. And then finally, I would just reinforce the point about some uses being prohibited altogether, right? I don't think any of us want to live in an Orwellian state where we're constantly surveilled and you can sort of figure out where someone is at any given point in time. So I think it's important that we also say, look, yes, there are some important law enforcement objectives that can be achieved through the responsible use of AI, but there's also certain lines that we as a liberal and democratic country don't want to cross, and that we make those distinctions clear.
Thank you. I really want to come back to that point about community reaching out to their MPs. So how else can communities get involved to hold their police services accountable for the use of this technology? Any ideas?
Yeah, well, I'll give you one example. There are in certain jurisdictions, and I know here you have a police board that governs you, opportunities to come and make your views known at meetings, and to say, look, here's a topic I'm concerned about, and here are what my concerns are. You're also, of course, allowed to directly reach out to the people who are the leaders of your policing force to say, here are some questions I have or concerns I have, and they can emerge from these kinds of discussions. So, I think sometimes people may not feel, whether it's a matter of comfort or thinking about who they can contact, enthusiastic about that. But at the end of the day, the core of policing, for example, is public trust, that law enforcement has the confidence of the public when it's carrying out its functions. So I think even directly reaching out and asking those questions and making your views known is an important thing to do.
Could I just add one?
Please go for it.
Oh yeah, I just want to note that transparency is also fundamental to the ability of the community to participate in topics like this. If you don't have transparency about what you're doing and how it's working, then the community's like, I don't know, what are we supposed to talk about, right? Like they don't know enough to be able to think about it and give you their opinion on it. So I think we could do a lot more on the transparency side to make sure that you're clearly disclosing both how you're using AI, how it's working, how you're thinking about using AI. Because then what that fosters is public interest groups can take that information and turn it into something that the community can work with, right? And understand, and then provide an opinion on. And that's capacity building. Like, that's building capacity in the community to talk about this stuff. And I think that's kind of one of the missing pieces right now.
Right.
Is that if we're not proactively building capacity, then what are we really asking our community to do? And I'd also add that one other important part of that is being clear with community what they can expect from community consultations. I think too often community consultations are done with a lot of goodwill on both sides, but it's often unclear like what exactly the community can expect to come out of that. Are they decision makers? Like, will their voices like determine whether an issue is approved or not? You know, what's my time worth to you? Like, is this going to have any real impact or effect? I think that's another crucial piece about making community consultation meaningful, frankly.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I'll pose that to the chief.
You know, what can the community expect from these types of consultations in terms of Barrie Police's decision making going forward?
I think the intent is, if we're looking, and Shakir's point is well said, we function, our ability to function is a direct result of the community trust. And the trust in our ability to do the job, and the trust in that we'll do it in an effective manner, but trust that we're doing so with good intent. I think our desire is to see, and yes, the community conversation, but I think Ryan noted as capacity, I would say literacy. We don't even talk enough about it to have, like, I think it's an understanding of what it actually is and what it means and what are all the potentials. And I think the more concrete the examples we use, from my perspective, when I'm speaking with the community, it's easier to understand. And I mean, it can certainly be biased in terms of, you know, here's a great scenario and here's a really bad misuse of the technology, but concrete scenarios that's what we're after in terms of this is what we're hoping to do. These are always potentials. But in terms of asking for the community's trust and building that and continue building it, it's one of those where we would like to see the conversation be two-way to influence the building of policy and procedure. Now, and I freely admit, like, if we had legislators coming out with laws, just so we're crystal clear, and I said it from before, we are not the law. We are not the law. We follow the law. So whether it be case law, whether it be legislative law, that's our limits, folks. And we operate within that, and we recognize it. That is the end-all, be-all. The charter sits above everything else. We're crystal clear on that, but the idea being within those, what are we able to do and what are we able to bring forward, and asking the community, what are their concerns, what are the fears, are we able to alleviate them? And I'll go back, like, if we show you, if our intent is to use, I just want to go into the nightmarish, the facial recognition, but for a missing person, but if we show you the occurrence number, you know, the brief summary without reaching FOI or identifying remarks, but we show you what we did it for in a narrative form, whether it's successful or not, does that alleviate some of the fear? Like, we're trying, we don't, in the end, the question is like, well, how do you do it right? We don't know. We don't know, and we'll freely admit that. But we're willing to learn. And this organization has been straightforward from the beginning. Since I sat in the hot seat there, we want to be a learning organization. We want to be evidence informed. We want to be research based. And we should always be looking to measure, target, test, and track what we're doing to see how effective it is.
One more quick point.
Yes, please.
Publishing those like assessment reports too is also super helpful, because the assessment report on like AI before you deploy it will say like, how does it comply with the charter? So how do you bring it to bear? How does it apply to privacy law? How does it accord with human rights so it's not discriminatory? How does the tech work? You know, making those assessment reports published and transparent gives the community, like, they can get into the conversation like right away. And one organization that's doing this is the RCMP. So I mentioned that tool that they're using to scan like child porn to identify real from fake victims. And they've got a report up on the website that you can read, like how the tech works, how they're deploying it, and all the operational protections around it. And what's great about this is that it actually helps the RCMP roll this tech out faster, right? because they've done their homework. They said, yeah, we've assessed this stuff, and yeah, we're publishing it so it's clear and transparent, and we invite comment on it too, right? So, yeah,
amazing.
great template to follow.
Amazing. And I think that is really one of our goals with
These community conversation series too is we were talking about literacy and ensuring that, you know, the community can't critique what they don't know. And so when we aren't transparent and we are educating people on what we're doing, it's very easy for us to not be questioned on that. And that is really not our goal here. So increasing that capacity, I will plug, and I'll have the link up later, the barriepolice.ca/technology. You know, that's where we'll be posting things from these slides to our future developments to what those policies, draft policies could look like for feedback, and having an open forum on that website now for, you know, kind of free text comments. And I promise they go to somebody, they'll go to me, so please be nice to me. And we'll use that to build capacity and build that feedback into our policies and procedures. And so when we did a quick pre-event survey, we asked, right, to what extent do some of these things make you as a community a little bit nervous? And we're seeing things like privacy violations, biased outcomes, lack of human oversight. So all of these pieces we know are community concerns, and we'll make sure we're addressing these as transparently as possible. But I do want to address a comment that came through our Mentimeter and a question we got even in our pre-survey that talks about what do police need to consider and implement policy to reduce the bias that can be perpetuated by these technologies. So I open that up to any member of the panel.
Well, I think you've importantly heard some of those themes come out in the remarks today. So, you know, the notion of transparency is key. You know, when we're dealing with any type of AI technology, you know, that intersects with the identity of a person, knowing what data was relied upon, or does that tool rely upon? How is that data generated? Where does it come from? What is the algorithm that is used, or the method that is used by the AI technology? And getting consultation and feedback on each of those points. The other piece as well, and you've heard it already, is the empirical verification, right? Has this technology been used before? Was it effective? Were there concerns around bias that have been raised? Because we know some of these tools have been employed in other jurisdictions, and you know, either they've been discontinued or not based on some of these concerns. So I'd say those are two, you know, from the comments so far, themes that I think are important to address bias.
I'll just add that we have really awesome laws on bias and discrimination in this province. The Human Rights Code is one great example of that. The question is, it's like, how do you apply that to AI systems? Like, how do you bring the law to bear to AI systems? And how do you bring it to bear on AI systems in policing? Right now, there's kind of no bridge there, right? This is kind of forward-looking. We're like, we're just kind of getting a handle on AI, so we're not exactly sure how the law should apply. And you made a great point about, you know, cases help guide police use of technology. There's not a lot of cases on this stuff yet to help guide us. So we need to be proactive about that. And what you're starting to see are like basically like assessment tools develop, where it's like a guided step-by-step walkthrough of like what the law expects in certain circumstances and how you can meet those challenges so that you can build compliance into your tool, that you can build compliance into the AI tech as you roll it out to make sure you don't get yourself into trouble. And we're actually kind of walking the walk on that. The Law Commission actually developed an AI and human rights assessment tool to guide the adoption of AI in the civil justice system. So what we did is basically create a tool that walks you step by step through what the Human Rights Code says about bias and discrimination, and helps build that bridge between what lawyers know about that stuff and what developers and deployers of AI systems can take into account to build their systems and roll it out properly. So there's not really a tool like that yet in Canada on the AI and criminal justice side. But our friends at the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police are actually developing a tool like that right now.
Okay. And
So that would be good.
A follow-up question I have, and someone posed this question. So when it comes to these AI assessments, whose role is it? Is it third party? Is it organizations like yourself, Ryan? Is it CACP? Who should be doing these assessments? And where do police go to get them?
I think there's kind of like a what we do today and what we can look towards tomorrow. So today, as I said, like the use of AI by police is effectively self-governing. So right now, they're the ones who would be basically governing themselves and assessing themselves in how these techs roll out. That's okay, but some of the examples we've seen are already raising concerns. So for example, the Toronto Police Service, to their great credit, was one of the first police forces in Canada to develop an AI policy, and it includes this assessment stuff in it. Good job. So when they actually came time to assessing automated license plate recognition, I think they classified it as a low-risk technology, despite the fact that it can lead to detention and arrest. So that raised some questions, not just from people generally, but from like the Privacy Commissioner's Office and the Human Rights Commissioner's Office, who said, really? Low risk? I don't know. It seems kind of medium to high to me based on the consequences. So that's kind of an example of where you can trip yourself up on this stuff. So I think where this is ultimately going is some kind of centralized process to conduct these assessments. In our consultations that we've done over the last year or so with everybody, one thing police have said is like, you know, it'd be great is if I could pick up reliable, validated AI technology off the shelf and just go use it so that I don't have to reinvent this huge assessment and legal thing all over again, that someone else has already done it and I can just pick it up off the shelf and use it. Like what? Like say a breathalyzer or an intoxilizer, right? It's regulated, it's tested, it's certified, and there's a whole process around it about how you use it appropriately, right? We need that for AI. So a lot of people are looking to sort of centralize this assessment function so that you don't get 45 different police forces trying to assess this stuff. And by the way, not every police force is as big as Toronto Police Services, which has a budget of $1.4 billion. I suspect yours isn't that big. And I'm thinking about places like Port Hope, which have like 30 police, you know, really small. How are they supposed to do all this stuff, man? So I think that's kind of where this stuff's going. Yeah.
And I do want to touch quickly on kind of the privacy piece. And I want to pose to the panel, and this is a big question that I ponder a lot. Where is the line between privacy and public safety? And I think everybody in this room will sit at a different point in that scale, but I'd love to hear from the panelists where's the balance? Where do
I'm
you
happy to
sit?
take an initial stab at that question. You know, I think we have to remember that, you know, the line that must always be adhered to is our Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Constitution. But even that is not absolute. It incorporates flexibility because we recognize that some of these things can sometimes be in tension. So for example, Section 8 of the Charter talks about how you have a right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure. But there are ways in which if a police force follows the law, has the lawful authority, and so on and so forth, that Section 8 is still complied with. So I think we have to recognize that even the limits that we do draw, that our courts draw, are themselves informed by some balancing already. But the other part of the answer, I think, to your question is, you know, that is something that we have to have our democratic process, provide an answer on. And, you know, different organizations will have their different views. We'll have our views as a civil liberties organization. Law enforcement may have a particular view. Other organizations might have a view. But that's why things like legislation are so important, because through that process, you have elected officials who are weighing in. You have different public interest groups that are able to make their views known. So I know that's not like the golden answer to the question, but I think it's the answer to the question is almost as much found in the process as opposed to there being one sentence that I think is the capstone answer to it.
Yes, I'm not going easy on you. That's a big one. Chief, where's the line? Or can they coexist, right? What does that look like too?
Well, I think they have to coexist, but they coexist in tension, because I think I've already stated like the impossible balance, and I think there is a need for that. What I don't want to do is live in a Hobbesian nightmare where life is short and brutish and violent at your end, and at the other end, everyone's the concept of being in chains with like government being that so restrictive, and it's somewhere in the middle. even with the charter, and I think that's an excellent point, the police are guided by that necessarily through case law, and we see the application of it, which necessarily impacts directly how we operate. But even in that charter, and you know, there's a whole, you can't, police services, not forces, but police services within this country. We're not allowed to do a number of things within restraint of the law, but there is Section 2, and that, you know, that there's as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society, there are limits. We are not all just, you know, you can't just run out there free and do anything you want, and there's privacy, and there's a limit where it abuts other people's freedoms and other people's enjoyment and other people's entitlement to safety, and there is that tension on a regular basis, and there's no one-liner. It's a morass, it's a swamp, but it's a necessary debate that happens regularly in courts, and that is the beautiful thing about our country. And again, at the end of the day, for policing, we know there's two words that in the criminal code that are quite clear to us, and they mandate behavior for us: may and shall. Shall means stop, like you will do this. We may feel something, it doesn't matter. Thou shalt, because it says in the code you shall do this. Whereas may, there's flexibility depending upon context, situation. So there's, it is always it's moving, it's breathing, and it changes. But I think it's necessary to always be having that discussion, and I don't disagree. Legislation is crystal clear, and then it gets taken to the courts, and then it's interpreted. But again, not against that. I think we have those three, that government and the judiciary that interprets the law. I'm, again, very supportive of that. So.
Ryan?
I would just say that our criminal courts are actually pretty amazing places, and they do unbelievably nuanced and sophisticated analysis of this question. And you can't draw any one line between privacy and public safety, because the way our courts analyze it is much more fine-grained than that. It really comes down to each individual use case, not even just each individual technology, but how that technology is being used and against whom and under what conditions and with what result. Like, it's a very nuanced analysis. That's a good thing, but what's not a good thing is having to litigate every single one of these use cases of AI. That is not going to work, because AI is a technology of general application, not one thing. It can apply to a million different things, just like you saw in my slide deck. So the courts will struggle mightily to help us draw these lines around all of these cases as a response to the use of these technologies. The only thing we can do is get ahead of the challenge. We need to think about how assessments can predict how Canadian law ought to apply to the use or the proposed use of AI in certain use cases, and then build practices, procedures, and rules around that to make sure that we comply. Because if we just wait for courts to do this, guess what's going to happen? They're going to get inundated, and we'll get good results, we'll get good decisions, but they'll come years after the technology's already been deployed. And that gets you into problems like Shakir pointed out with the gouge inquiry and the mother risk inquiry, where years later we got to pick up the pieces, and we're dealing with hundreds, if not thousands, of wrongful convictions. Right. That's not good.
Can I just add one brief point?
Yes.
I also think sometimes it's worth thinking about how those different concepts are linked together. You know, if I'm somebody who feels that if I go out in public and because there's technology being used that might misidentify me as a criminal suspect, do I feel safe, right? If the result of privacy, a certain type of AI technology means that I can't participate in society at large. So I think sometimes when we're thinking about the balancing, the law enforcement objective that might be there right on the cards, is important, right? The missing person, the case you're trying to, crack. But there is a reason why those countervailing considerations are there, and they too also can relate to people feeling safe in their community and being able to, go about their daily lives.
Now, I do want to say, it's
Not all bad, right? These technologies exist for a reason, and I think, like I said, it's critical yet constructive. So I do want to ask, from the panelist perspectives, what's AI's biggest promise in policing or public safety?
It depends on what lens I'm looking at it through, because we live in the real world and there's economics involved. And as has been highlighted already, the ability to go through voluminous amounts of information in like fractions, exponential fractions of time is incredibly valuable. To sift through massive data piles, trend lines, and see connections that you couldn't see unless you were spending, you had teams of tons of people looking at the data, trying to connect the dots. The ability does exist in terms of being efficient and effective. There's a lot of positives. How effective are we at, obvious examples, finding people if they're, if there's a misadventure, if there's a missing individual. We have finite resources right now. How can we take those limited resources, but add value to them in terms of leveraging technology to help us get there?
Anybody else want to add?
One thing I'll point out is that there's like an increasing number of crimes being committed by people using AI. So like voice cloning now to like hack into your bank account and like, oh my gosh, who knows what's going on. So I think, just when you think about the potential scale of that, particularly with the introduction of AI agents, where like you can actually get these like little bots running around the internet on your behalf doing all kinds of things. Police will struggle mightily to keep up with that stuff if they don't have their own kind of countervailing technology. So I anticipate that's going to be one huge benefit. And a lot of crimes are just really complicated now. It's like I said, there's cases involving 500,000 emails or texts. There's cases involving hundreds of thousands of images. And as the chief just said, it takes a team of 12 weeks and weeks and weeks to get through that, and it can be kind of traumatic. So AI can help a lot with that. My only point is that, to gain the benefits of AI, we got to control for the risks. And so I think that's where this whole idea about AI assurance comes up, and it's the way that we're going to get those benefits while controlling for the risks.
Absolutely.
Can I throw in one quick point there? Was it Griffith you were referring to with the RCMP?
The GRIFI technology.
GRIFI, yes. And perhaps when I get a little too, aloof there, there's a very real impact too. There are people who wear uniforms or work for police services that traditionally had to go through volumes of the most horrific images that would damage anyone in any civil society. And the ability of technology to categorize and reduce the exposure of people. Yes, they're officers and they're members of police services, but they're people. And you're reducing human damage. And and at the end of the day, police services are, technology is wonderful, and I'll leverage it all day. I think there's value, but at the end of the day, we're just people in organizations, public service, and they're trying to help their community. And it's anytime we can reduce damage to those people, you're going to find a big fan in this service. And I think across the board. And I don't think there's anyone up here wouldn't. I think when it's done responsibly, I think the idea is if we can save people having to be exposed to that type of stuff. We can debate why it's a bad idea, but as long as there's controls, it reduces human damage.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to fire some quick questions to the chief and I.
All right.
Just keeping
Hot
things
takes.
Oh, I love this.
Chief's hot takes.
just so we can
Let's go.
wrap up. One of the biggest questions we got, both pre-survey and today right now, is cost. So, Chief, what is the cost of these kinds of technologies, and how will this be reported back in terms of budget considerations or those pieces like that?
So it
Depends on the tech.
It absolutely depends on the tech and the type of which company that you're looking at, and its usage. And so I will, not one that we have or we would be responsible for, but let me give you an example. So there is a cost. Let's say, at 6 intersections within this city, over a 5-year period, we have hotspots of pedestrian strikes and serious motor vehicle collisions, which require police officers to attend. Our citizens are actually being harmed in great ways going up to the Royal Victoria Hospital. We could put a police officer at every single one of those 6 intersections, and we would be there to enforce the law 24/7. And there's a fixed cost on that. And not one person in this community really wants to pay that. That's an it's an excessive amount of money. But there is the return on investment from a technology like red light cameras, which have the LPR, and again, there is an error rate, but that I think is more tolerable. It wouldn't be run by the police, just so we're all crystal clear, within Ontario. But the reality is you can compare that cost to a 24/7 police officer standing there or in a vehicle monitoring traffic and enforcing red lights. There is a cost. I think and that's the easy one in the low-hanging fruit that I can articulate. There's a fixed cost there. It depends on what you're looking at. Autonomous drones or remotely piloted aircraft systems, it depends. When they first came out, they were in the hundreds of thousands, and now people can get them for, $5,000. What are you using it for? What are you equipping it with? Again, if you're putting facial rec on that, which we're not doing at this point, and I'm not suggesting we are, but I'm like, there's an extra cost involved in that. I mean, if you can consider it, it's possible. And there's a company out there that does auto redaction, and they do a number of things, and they offer cameras that you can wear on your body. There's the cost associated to that. But you ask the community, would you prefer the officers not have body-worn cameras? And in today's world, is that Pandora's box, and is it open? And is it shuttable? Or is it worth shutting? Or is it there's a whole discussion there and around the value of the evidence. And is it really, it's one perspective, it's not total package. It's a very difficult question to answer. So.
Okay. On the topic of body-worn camera, that was another question.
Okay, good.
So for body-worn camera footage, is it always gone through a redaction process or only when it has to be referred back to?
Oh, that's a good question. So if it's used in a criminal court case, absolutely yes. Or in a police investigation, it absolutely is redacted. If it's in any way FOIable and it's to be provided, it is redacted.
So not every single one is just the ones that quote unquote need to be either for criminal cases or FOIs or various police investigations.
I believe so, but there's potential I'm wrong.
Okay, we'll take that. There's a question on facial rec, and I'll hold that because in 2 weeks from today, same place, same time, we're doing a facial rec specific community conversation series with facial rec specific peeps. So I'm going to hold off on that one just for now. How are public CCTV cameras used, and how long is that data stored?
Okay, so again, it depends. I'll add the easy question sort of is how long is it stored? So we abide by the LEARN principle or the LEARN framework that how long you can hold on your data, but we actually are far shorter a period of time. We have no desire to hold on to that information, and we know that does have an impact on people's feelings of, Big Brother watching. So we generally hold on to it for 15 days if it's not used and it is overwritten, gone. So that's important that we're not holding on to it for any length of time. But if it is used in a criminal investigation or in an accident investigation or something, we will hold on to it until the process is through the court system. And I think that's an expectation of our community. We're not going to dump evidence. It is evidence that can be used in criminal court because there's value there, and it is beyond us for the courts to both defense and of the Crown.
Just to respect everybody's time, we do have a lot of really great questions coming in, but it is a Tuesday night nearing 8 o'clock. So what we'll do is we'll continue to keep this open, gather these questions, and like I said, this website will be kind of the go-to, and I will personally sit down with the chief to make sure to get answers to these questions and post them out. There will be an open text box on this website, thoughts, comments, things you'd like to see from the service. Like I said, I promise that goes to a real person. We are monitoring this, and we're having that feedback being inputted into our drafting of the policies and shaping how we're using these things, and doing all things communication back and forth through this website as much as possible. And like I said, in 2 weeks from now, we're going to have a specific facial recognition session because we know that that is a big topic. And I'm sure, like we've said, a lot of these questions is it depends. So let's dig into one very specific example that I think is really pertinent to the community. So I would like to say thank you to the panelists. Thank you for coming down here. Thank you for helping us learn. Audience, I hope we got what we wanted out of that. And even as we stop the live stream and pieces like that, we'll stick around and can chat.
Well, and thanks to Madison for being a
Yes.
great host here.
Oh, thank you. All right, there's lots of snacks, drinks up here. Come grab whatever you'd like. And thank you, everybody. Okay.